The liar. The con artist who stole 15 years of honest work from a man who never once asked for anything he hadn't earned. That was what the signs outside the Hargrove County Courthouse said. Someone had printed them on bright yellow cardstock and taped them to wooden stakes. A small crowd held them up in the cold morning air, their breath rising in white puffs above their heads. Camera crews from 2 local stations had already set up on the steps. Inside, on the 4th floor, in a narrow hallway that smelled of floor wax and old coffee, a woman named Petra Dunwell sat alone on a wooden bench with her hands folded in her lap. Petra Dunwell, 44 years old, founder and director of Clearwater Financial Advisors, a firm she had built from a single rented office and a second-hand desk into one of the most trusted independent investment houses in the state. She wore a charcoal blazer she had pressed herself that morning because she had not wanted to think about anything else. She stared at the floor. Her attorneys had called at 6:45 in the morning. Both of them. First Gerald, then Patricia, within 4 minutes of each other. Gerald had said he was deeply sorry. He had used the word untenable. He said that new information had come to light regarding the origin of certain client funds, and that his firm could no longer represent her without significant ethical risk to themselves. He said he wished her well. The call lasted 90 seconds. Patricia had not even offered an apology. She said her firm was withdrawing from the case effective immediately, and that Petra would receive her files by courier within the week. Then she hung up. Petra had sat at her kitchen table for 20 minutes after that, holding her phone, watching the light through the window change from gray to pale gold. Her daughter Marisol, 8 years old, had come downstairs in her pajamas and asked if everything was okay. Petra had said yes. She had made Marisol's lunch, walked her to the bus stop, waved at the end of the block, and then driven to the courthouse alone. She had no representation. She had no plan. She had $300,000 in legal fees, already paid to 2 firms who had now vanished, and a civil trial beginning in 45 minutes that would determine whether she had defrauded her clients of $11 million. She had not. But sitting on that bench, alone, she was beginning to understand that the truth was not the same thing as a defense. The 4th floor of the Hargrove County Courthouse had a janitorial closet near the east stairwell, between courtroom 4B and the clerk's office. At 7:58 that morning, the closet door opened, and a man named Owen Garrett stepped out pushing a yellow mop bucket on wheels. Owen Garrett, 38 years old. Maintenance staff, county government, 11 years of service. 6 feet even, with the kind of hands that come from a decade of physical work. Broad-palmed, slightly rough, a faded scar along the right index finger from a job at a packaging plant before the county job. He wore the gray uniform with the county seal on the chest pocket. His name was stitched above it in white thread. He had started his shift at 5 in the morning. He would finish at 2 in the afternoon, if nothing went sideways. His daughter, Becca, 6 years old, had a school performance at 4. She was playing a sunflower in the spring pageant. She had been practicing her one line. I reached toward the light for 3 weeks. He was not going to miss it. Owen guided the bucket down the hallway, pausing to clean a coffee spill near the water fountain. He wrung the mop, worked the floor in long even strokes, the way he had learned to do it efficiently without making noise. He had cleaned this floor hundreds of times. He knew every scuff mark, every warped tile near the radiator, every inch of it. He noticed the woman on the bench because she was completely still in a way that had nothing to do with patience. He had seen nervous people wait in this hallway before. Witnesses, defendants, people waiting for verdicts. They shifted. They checked their phones. They paced. This woman was not moving at all. He didn't say anything. He wasn't supposed to engage with people involved in proceedings. He moved his bucket toward the far end of the hall. Then he heard her exhale. A single, controlled breath. The kind a person releases when they are trying very hard not to cry in public. He stopped. He looked at her again. He noticed, on the bench beside her, a manila folder with tabs along the edge. Financial filings. He noticed the way she was dressed. Professional, composed on the outside, and the way her hands were gripping each other in her lap. White-knuckled. And he recognized something. He could not have named it exactly. But it was the look of someone who knew the truth and had just realized the truth alone was not going to be enough. He leaned his mop against the wall. "Excuse me," he said quietly. "Are you waiting for courtroom 4B? She looked up. "Yes. Are you represented?" She looked at him for a moment. Something crossed her face, just a kind of raw exhaustion. "No," she said. "I was, until 6:45 this morning." Owen was quiet for a moment. There are decisions that a person makes in a fraction of a second that their rational mind never catches up with until later. The decision simply arrives, whole and certain, and the person acts before they fully understand why. "My name is Owen Garrett," he said. "I have a law degree from Rutgers. I passed the bar in this state 14 years ago. I have never practiced, but my license is current. I renew it every year. I don't know why I do. I always told myself it was just in case." Petra Dunwell stared at him. "I clean this building," he said. "I understand that completely. I'm not trying to make a joke. I'm telling you because you have." He checked the clock on the wall. 41 minutes, and I would like to know if there's anything I can do." She stared at him for a long moment. Then, she said, "Why?" It was an honest question. She wasn't being rude. She genuinely wanted to know. Owen thought about it. He thought about Becca, at home right now, being driven to school by his neighbor Dorothy, wearing her sunflower costume under her winter coat, because she had refused to take it off. He thought about all the years he had cleaned buildings, where people made decisions about other people's lives, and how many times he had watched someone walk out of a courtroom, broken in ways they would carry for the rest of their life. "Because someone should," he said. Petra gave him the folder. They sat on the bench together for 38 minutes. Owen read. He read fast and clean, the way a person reads, when they already know what they're looking for, and are simply confirming what they suspect. The case against Petra Dunwell had been built by a man named Sutherland Price. Sutherland Price, 61. Founder of Price Capital Management, the largest investment firm in the county. He had been trying to acquire Clearwater Financial for 4 years. Petra had refused every offer. When she refused the final offer, the largest, and accompanied by what she had described to her lawyers as an implied threat, Price had filed a civil complaint, alleging that Petra had knowingly moved client funds into high-risk vehicles without consent, misrepresenting their nature, and had concealed the resulting losses. Price had witnesses. He had documents. He had 3 former Clearwater employees, who were prepared to testify that Petra had directed them to falsify client communication records. What he had built, Owen saw immediately, was not a case, it was a frame. The documents were the tell. Owen had a particular quality of mind. His professors had called it forensic instinct, the ability to look at a chain of information and feel where the links had been manufactured rather than grown. It was why he had been recruited by 2 firms after law school. It was also why when he had tried to work at one of them for 8 months and watched how cases were actually won, he had quietly decided that he did not want to spend his life doing this. He had taken the county job. He had met Cassandra. He had had Becca. Cassandra had left when Becca was 2, and now it was just the 2 of them, Owen and Becca, in the house he had bought with a down payment made from 11 years of careful saving. He looked at the documents again. The client communications that Price was presenting as falsified originals. Owen noticed something in the metadata notation on the printed header. A formatting artifact. A tiny inconsistency in the date stamp structure that only appeared in documents generated after a specific software update in a records management system he happened to know, because the county used the same system, and he had watched the IT department roll out that update 16 months ago. The documents Price was presenting as originals were not originals. They had been generated after the complaint was filed. Owen closed the folder. He looked at Petra. "Tell me everything," he said, "from the beginning. Tell me about the first time Price contacted you about an acquisition," she told him. Courtroom 4B filled quickly. The benches on the left side held Price's legal team. 4 attorneys in expensive suits, 2 paralegals, a junior associate who kept her eyes on a tablet. Price himself sat at the plaintiff's table, looking relaxed in the way that powerful men look relaxed when they believe the outcome is already decided. The gallery held reporters, a few investors, several of Petra's former clients, who had come to witness what had been described to them as justice. When Petra walked through the doors of courtroom 4B, she was alone. No briefcase, just her folder. No legal team behind her. She walked to the defense table and sat down. The murmur in the room was audible. Price's lead attorney, a woman named Claudia Hennessy, leaned toward him and said something quietly. Price smiled slightly. The judge, the Honorable Martin Okafor, a careful man with gray temples and reading glasses on a chain, entered and called the room to order. He looked at the defense table. Mrs. Dunwell, he said, I was informed you would be represented by counsel today. I was, Petra said. My attorneys withdrew from the case this morning. The room shifted. That is a significant development, Judge Okafor said carefully. Do you wish to request a continuance? Petra opened her mouth, and the back door of the courtroom opened. Owen Garrett walked in wearing his county maintenance uniform, carrying his bar license on a single sheet of paper, and Petra's folder under his arm. He had taken 3 minutes to retrieve the license from his locker downstairs. He had called Dorothy from the hallway to ask if she could pick up Becca from school and bring her to the courthouse by 4, just in case. He walked to the defense table. He placed the paper in front of Judge Okafor's clerk and said, clearly enough for the room to hear, Owen Garrett, bar number 2241 JV, appearing pro bono on behalf of the defendant. The silence lasted approximately 4 seconds. Then Claudia Hennessy stood up. Your Honor, I must object to this. This is highly irregular. The defendant had no representation as of this morning. She has representation now, Judge Okafor said. He looked at Owen over his reading glasses. He looked at the license. He looked at Owen again. The uniform, the county seal on the chest, the mop calluses on his hands. Mr. Garrett, are you prepared to proceed? Yes, Your Honor. Very well. Judge Okafor set down his glasses. Let's begin. The first hour belonged to Claudia Hennessy. She was good. Owen had to acknowledge that. She laid out the case methodically. The timeline of client complaints, the financial records, the chain of decisions she attributed to Petra. She called her first witness, a former Clearwater employee named Douglas Pemberton. Then caught herself and produced the actual name from her notes, a man named Alan Forsyth, who testified that he had personally seen Petra direct staff to backdate client acknowledgement forms. Owen cross-examined Forsyth for 12 minutes. He did not attack the man. He did not raise his voice. He asked about Alan Forsyth's employment record at Clearwater, when he had joined, what his role had been, who his supervisor was. He asked about a performance review from 3 years ago, which Petra had shown him in the hallway, in which Forsyth had been formally cautioned for altering client files without authorization. Alan Forsyth began to sweat. Owen asked who had contacted him about testifying. He asked when that contact had occurred, relative to when Forsyth had begun his current employment, at Price Capital Management, where he had worked for 18 months at a salary 60% higher than his Clearwater salary. Forsyth said the two things were unrelated. Owen said, of course, and sat down. The second witness was a financial analyst who had reviewed the investment records. She testified that the risk profiles of the instruments Petra had allegedly moved client funds into were inconsistent with the conservative strategies Clearwater had represented to clients. Owen cross-examined for 9 minutes. He asked about the source documents she had used for her analysis. She named them. He asked whether she had reviewed the original client consent agreements or the copies provided by the plaintiff's legal team. She said the copies. He asked her to look at a specific page of the consent documents, page 4, subsection C, and read the disclosure language aloud. She read it. It included explicit disclosure of the investments in question, and he asked whether she had seen this language before forming her opinion. She had not. No further questions, Owen said. Claudia Hennessy moved to introduce the centerpiece of her case, a series of internal Clearwater communication records that she argued demonstrated Petra had knowingly concealed investment losses from clients. Owen stood. Your Honor, I'd like to examine the authentication of these documents before they're entered into evidence. Hennessy objected. The judge allowed the inquiry. Owen took the documents. He held them for a moment. Then he asked the plaintiff's technical witness, a digital forensics consultant named Mr. Arridge, to come forward. He asked Arridge about the document's metadata. Arridge confirmed they were authentic originals. Owen asked about the date stamp formatting in the document header. Arridge confirmed the format. Owen asked whether Arridge was familiar with the records management software Clearwater had used. Arridge said yes. Owen asked whether Arridge knew that this software had released a formatting update, specifically update version 4.3.1, that changed the date stamp structure in exactly the way visible in these headers. Arridge said he was not certain. Owen said, I have here the software release notes for version 4.3.1, which were published 16 months ago. He produced them, printed that morning from a public access terminal in the courthouse library, during the 4 minutes he had spent there while Petra reviewed her notes. This formatting format did not exist in this software prior to 16 months ago. The communications these documents purport to record occurred 22 to 27 months ago. If these documents were created when the plaintiff claims, this formatting artifact could not be present. The room was very quiet. Mr. Arridge, Owen said, would you say that a document displaying a formatting structure that did not exist at the time the document was purportedly created raises questions about the document's authenticity? Arridge looked at Claudia Hennessy. She could not help him. Yes, Arridge said. That would raise questions. Owen set the documents down. Your Honor, the defense moves that these exhibits be withheld from evidence pending independent forensic review. Judge Okafor looked at the documents. He looked at Hennessy. He looked at Owen. Motion granted, he said. Sutherland Price, for the first time that morning, stopped looking relaxed. He leaned toward Hennessy and spoke quietly and quickly. She straightened. She called a brief recess. Judge Okafor granted it. In the hallway, Petra stood near the window that looked out over the parking lot. She pressed her fingers to her mouth for a moment. You found that this morning, she said. It was not quite a question. On the bench, Owen said. In the folder I had 41 minutes. She shook her head slowly. Why didn't anyone else? She stopped herself. She knew why. Because no one else had been sitting with her folder on a bench at 7:58 in the morning, looking for a way to help without being paid. What happens now? She asked. They know the documents are compromised, Owen said. Their entire case structure rests on those records. Without them, the testimony they've built doesn't connect to anything. Hennessy is good. She'll try to pivot, introduce corroborating material, find another angle. But they're not prepared for this. They came in this morning expecting no defense at all. He said it plainly, without satisfaction. You should know, he added, that the authenticity question alone doesn't end this. Price has resources. He can request his own forensic review and try to slow this down. This may not be over today. I know, Petra said. But, Owen said carefully, I think you're going to be all right. She looked at him. You think? Or you know I think, he said. I don't make promises I can't keep. She almost smiled. It was the first time that morning. When court resumed, Claudia Hennessy did exactly what Owen had predicted. She attempted to introduce a secondary set of records, physical printouts, she said, retrieved from a backup archive. Owen objected on the grounds that these had not been disclosed to the defense in pretrial discovery. Judge Okafor sustained the objection. Hennessy called a final witness, a former client of Clearwater, who testified that she had not been told about changes to her investment portfolio and had suffered losses. Owen cross-examined gently. He asked the woman whether she had received a quarterly statement in the relevant period. She said she had. He asked whether she had read it. She said she had not, because financial documents confused her, and she trusted Clearwater to handle things. He asked whether she had ever signed a document authorizing discretionary management of her account, in which Clearwater would have had latitude to make investment decisions on her behalf. She thought for a moment. She said she might have. He showed her the document. She identified her signature, "I'm very sorry about your losses," Owen said. No further questions. He said it and meant it. The woman had genuinely been hurt. That was real. He wanted the jury to understand. This was a person who had lost money. Not because Petra had deceived her, but because markets move and not every portfolio survives them. And the discretionary agreement she had signed was designed precisely for situations like this, written plainly, reviewed by her own attorney at the time of signing. The distinction mattered. He made sure it was clear. Closing arguments took 1 hour and 20 minutes. Hennessy argued that regardless of the document questions, the pattern of behavior was evident, that clients had been harmed, that the evidence of intent was present in the overall record. Owen argued for 11 minutes. He did not use notes. He stood in front of the jury, 8 people, 4 men, 4 women, ranging from a retired teacher to a young man who worked in logistics. And he said this: "You've heard a great deal today about documents, about whose records say what, and when they were created. I want to step back from that for a moment and ask you to consider something simpler. You've watched Petra Dunwell sit at that table all morning. You've seen how she answered questions. You've seen what she was willing to produce. Every record, every consent form, every communication she had, without hesitation, without objection. And you've heard what the other side was not able to produce without question. I'm not asking you to decide this case on instinct. I'm asking you to decide it on the evidence, all of it, and to ask yourself, who in this room behaved like someone with something to hide?" He let that sit. Dunwell built her firm by being honest with people about their money. That is not a common thing. It should be, but it isn't. It made her valuable. It also made her a target. What you decide today is not just about her. It's about what kind of place this county is for people who try to do things the right way. That's all. He sat down. The jury deliberated for 4 hours and 12 minutes. Owen sat in the hallway during deliberations. He had taken off his jacket. The county uniform underneath was slightly damp from the tension of the morning. He drank a cup of vending machine coffee and checked his phone. Dorothy had texted, "Becca's out at 3:15. We'll be there by 3:45 if traffic's okay. She's still wearing the costume." He smiled at his phone. He could picture it perfectly. Becca in the yellow pedals, sitting in Dorothy's back seat, probably talking the entire ride about her line. Petra came and sat down beside him. She had brought him a coffee from the machine down the hall. She handed it to him, and he already had one, but he accepted it anyway. They sat in silence for a whilst. She said eventually, "No, 14 years. 14 years. She thought about that. Why not? He was quiet for a moment. He thought about how to answer honestly. "I watch people in this building for a long time," he said. "I watched how things get decided, who gets heard and who doesn't, and I thought, if I practice law, I'm one lawyer. I can take 20, 30 cases a year if I push it. I help 30 people, maybe, if I'm lucky, if I'm good. And then 30 other people get someone else, and maybe that someone else is fine, and maybe they're not." He paused. "That math never made sense to me. I couldn't find a way to do it that felt like enough, and cleaning this building does." She didn't say it unkindly. "Cleaning this building pays for Becca," he said. "That's enough." Petra was quiet, but, she said. "Today was different," Owen said. "Today I was right here. Today there was something I could do, and no one else was going to do it." She looked at the floor for a moment. "My daughter drew me a picture this morning," she said, "before school. She left it on the kitchen counter. It was supposed to be a judge, I think, and the judge was saying, she wrote in a little speech bubble. It said not guilty with a backwards G. Her voice was very steady. She's 8. She doesn't fully understand what's happening. But she wanted me to have something." Owen nodded. "That's what you're fighting for," he said. "That's always what it is." At 3:41 in the afternoon, the jury returned. At 3:44, the forewoman read the verdict, not liable on all counts. Price stood immediately. His jaw was tight. Hennessy put a hand on his arm. He shook it off. In the gallery, someone began to clap. Then a second person. It was not a standing ovation. This was a courthouse, not a theater, but it was genuine and it was warm. And Judge Okafor let it go on for 5 seconds before calling order. Petra sat at the defense table with her hands in her lap, very still. Then she pressed both hands flat on the table surface, as if to confirm it was solid, that this was real, that she was still here. She turned to Owen. She looked at him for a long moment. She said, "Thank you." He said, "You did the hard part. You told the truth. I just made sure people could hear it." At 3:58, Dorothy's car pulled into the courthouse parking lot. Owen was standing on the front steps when Becca came running across the pavement, in her puffy winter coat, with the sunflower petals sticking out from the collar and cuffs, bright yellow, against the gray afternoon. She hit him in the midsection with both arms, and he caught her and lifted her in one motion, and she said, "Daddy, I practiced my line 3 times in the car." "Tell me," he said. She leaned back in his arms, very serious, and said, with full theatrical commitment, "I reached toward the light." He held her for a moment without saying anything. Dorothy smiled at him from across the parking lot. Behind him, through the courthouse doors, Petra Dunwell stood in the lobby speaking quietly, with a woman Owen didn't recognize. A reporter, he thought. Or perhaps another attorney. She caught Owen's eye through the glass. She raised one hand, just slightly, in acknowledgement. He raised his hand back. Becca said, "Who's that?" "Someone I helped today," Owen said. "What did you help her with?" He set Becca down and took her hand, and they walked toward the parking lot, their breath rising in the cold air. "I helped her tell the truth," he said, in a place where it was hard to be heard. Becca thought about this for a moment, the way 6-year-olds consider things, fully, without distraction. "Was she scared?" Becca asked. "Yes," Owen said. "She was very scared. But you helped her." "I tried." Becca nodded as though this settled something important. She swung their joined hands once, twice. "Daddy tells the truth too," she said simply, "to no one in particular." He squeezed her hand. They walked to the car, and the afternoon closed around them, ordinary and entire, the way good days sometimes do. Not with ceremony, not with fanfare, but just with the quiet weight of a thing that went the way it should have. 3 weeks later, Owen Garrett filed paperwork to establish a pro bono legal clinic, operating out of the Hargrove County Public Library, on the first and third Saturday of every month. He covered the filing fees himself. He put a small notice in the community bulletin, and did not take out an advertisement. The first Saturday 9 people showed up. He helped every one of them.